So in this lesson, we're just going to continue practicing how to multiply, add, subtract, and multiply by a scalar when it comes to matrices. So you'll notice in the homework, you're going to be given 3 matrices. They're going to name those A, B, and C. And then they're just going to tell you, do the following operations with those matrices. So for this particular case, we're going to be taking A times B. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy those down first. So there's my A. Here's B. So that's A times B, and we'll go ahead and do that calculation in a second. I'm just going to keep writing my initial substitution in here. And then we're going to take A again, which I'm just going to copy and paste. And we're going to multiply that times C. So there's our initial setup. All right, so now let's go ahead and do some multiplying. So this is just a review of last week. So we have 2 times 1 from our first row and our first column, followed by 1 times 2. Then we're going to swap that to the second column. So then we have 2 times 3 plus 1 times the negative 1. Then we swap them both. So we have row 2 back to column 1. So we have 0 times 1 plus negative 1 times 2. Then we go to our second column. So we have 0 times 3 plus negative 1 times negative 1. So there's kind of the work being shown to multiply those 2 by 2s together. All right, so let's do it for the second one. I'm going to kind of condense it down a little bit as far as what I say out loud, just to kind of make sure these notes go at a pretty decent pace. So here we should get 2 times 0 plus 1 times 3, then 2 times the negative 1 plus 1 times 1. Then we have 0 times 0 plus negative 1 times 3, and 0 times the negative 1 plus negative 1 times 1. All right, so there's our multiplication. So let's go ahead and figure out what each one of those actually gives us. I'm going to use my magnifying glass so that we can look at all of it at once. So our first set of matrices, we should get 2 times 1 plus 1 times 2, which is just 4. And then we have 2 times 3 plus 1 times the negative 1. So in other words, 6 plus a negative 1, which is 5. Then we should get 0 plus a negative 2, which is a negative 2. And then 0 plus 1, which is 1. So there's our first matrix. We're going to add that on to our second one here. So we should get 2 times 0 plus 1 times 3, which is just 3. Then we should get a negative 2 plus 1, which is a negative 1. Then we should get 0 plus a negative 3, which is a negative 3. And then 0 plus a negative 1, which is a negative 1. All right, last but not least, we're going to add these together. Remember to add the items that are in the same location within your matrices. So the 4 and the 3 should give us 7. 5 and a negative 1 gives us 4. Negative 2 and a negative 3 gives us negative 5. And 1 and a negative 1 gives us 0. And I know these can look a little lengthy. There's only 4 of them in your homework. So just take your time, show your work. There's a lot of places where mistakes can be made. So just be very diligent. Really trace your work all the way through. All right, so now we're going to do 2 times b times c, which is going to give us a chance to bring back in a scalar. So we're going to do that as our 2. And then we're going to take that times b times c. So I'm going to borrow these from our previous problem. So b is this one here. Let me go ahead and erase out what we don't need. All right. And then we're going to borrow c, which is right here. All right, so I'm just going to go left to right. With the commutative property, we're just going to, you can multiply technically in any order, but we're going to go ahead and just do the scalar first. So it's going to multiply into this first one, just kind of like the distributive property, which should give us 2, 6, 4, and negative 2. Just going to go ahead and copy and paste the second one. Then we're going to do our multiplication of two 2x2s. So this should give us 2 times 0 plus 6 times 3. Then 2 times the negative 1 plus 6 times 1. Then 4 times 0 plus negative 2 times 3. 4 times the negative 1 plus negative 2 times 1. All right, go ahead and add these up. 18 plus 0 is 18. Negative 2 plus 6 is 4. 0 plus a negative 6 is a negative 6. And negative 4 plus a negative 2 is a negative 6.